message is simple. Make your product here in America, and only in America. We are not going to be taken advantage of anymore.
And as far as I'm concerned about the Nippon Steel deal, it's going to bring money into the Pittsburgh area.
We still exist in a society in which the gaps that were initially created as a result of slavery, as a result of Jim Crow.
Hello, I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. Thank you for joining us. Well, ahead of next week's pivotal presidential debate, Vice President Kamala Harris will spend time over the next few days in Pittsburgh preparing for that face-to-face, her first ever with Donald Trump. The debate microphone rules saga has finally come to an end. Both campaigns agree microphones will be muted when the candidates are not speaking. Meanwhile, today in New York City, it was former President Donald Trump's turn to deliver remarks on the economy, presenting a plan that he says will reignite explosive economic growth. And he also hinted at a role that Elon Musk could play in his potential administration. Trump is also dealing with more legal troubles while he's on the campaign trail. He pleaded not guilty to that superseding indictment in his federal election interference case out of Washington, D.C. So for all of this, our team of reporters are covering every angle and standing by for us. Weijia Jiang is covering the Harris campaign. Bob Costa has the details from New York City, and we'll start here in Washington with our own Scott McFarlane on those details in this January 6th hearing. Scott, thank you for being here. So Trump was not there, but his lawyers were, of course. What did we learn today? I know we have some breaking news.
As we came on the air, a pretty big revelation. The judge handling Donald Trump's 2020 election conspiracy case here in Washington has ruled that the special counsel, Jack Smith, can file and show some of his case by September 26th in the court. The special counsel has been keen on trying to get some evidence, some exhibits, some potential elements from his case before the judge, before the court, which means before the world. And he can now do so before the election. That is quite a variable for Donald Trump. Quite a victory for the special counsel in a case that is going to be nowhere near trial before November 5th. He can now show some of his hand to the world this month.
So even though we won't have a trial date until later, or we won't have a conclusion until much later after the election, we could see some of his evidence shortly. What is the Trump legal team? How are they handling this? What was their response today?
This consumed most of the hearing today, the first hearing in this case in nearly a year because it was held up by the Supreme Court. This Trump team said this is not fair to Donald Trump to let this type of filing get out into the public sphere at what they call a sensitive time, which is clearly a reference to the election. And we know this because the judge says, I don't want to hear about elections. I don't care about election day. I don't care about campaigns. I'm treating Donald Trump as I would any other criminal defendant. The election will not be a factor. And she very much proved that with her decision today, saying Jack Smith has until September 26th to file whatever he wants to file. To be clear, we don't know what's going to be in that brief, but they raised the prospect in court today that they're going to show something of their hand. We've talked about, maybe a mini trial ahead of the election. Instead of a mini trial, this could be a mini trial on paper, where something is shown that could be particularly damaging to Donald Trump in a legal way, but also in a political way.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what he exactly shows. But as you note, the public will see this as well.
Trump will challenge this. To be clear, they're going to go to court. I would expect to try to stop that filing from happening.
Okay.
But Judge Tanya Chutkan has been, from the start of this case, crisp on her deadlines and very much against what she would consider needless stalling or delays.
Very interesting. Well, we will keep an eye on that, as I know you will as well. Thank you so much, Scott, for being here. We appreciate it. Bob Costa, I want to turn to you to discuss Trump's economic speech in New York, where you are. I know you were at the speech today on the economy. As we've been talking about most of this election cycle, this is what our polling shows one of Trump's strength, at least in terms of how people are viewing him and the economy in terms of our polling. What did he say today?
Good to be with you, Caitlin. So for former President Donald Trump, this was, in a sense, a trip home. New York City, the place he grew up. He grew up in Jamaica, Queens. And you see now him speaking to these business leaders. I was there in the back of the room. Many CEOs there, investor types. And he was making a pitch to them to hang around, to stick with him in this campaign season, to not be in any way tempted politically to move toward Vice President Harris, who has her own proposals on small business policies. She just this week rolled out in New Hampshire her ideas on providing incentives for small businesses when it comes to possible tax breaks. Trump also underscored his message on trade, and it's important to note that he keeps coming back to trade. And one of the reasons I'm told he's doing this is because he believes in 2016, it's the trade issue that resonated with working voters. So he was talking to CEOs today, talking to Wall Street, but he was at the same time making sure that those workers out in the States knew that he was going to have some kind of punitive policy on trade should people try to push jobs or manufacturing abroad.
Yeah, Bob, that's such an interesting dynamic to me, this kind of split screen, but also a coalition of kind of wealthy donor base and the working voter base that Trump is trying to connect. And we saw him do that successfully in 2016. I do want to play a little bit of what he said today. Here's a taste.
My plan will rapidly defeat inflation, quickly bring down prices, and reignite explosive economic growth. Kamala Harris will take more money out of American pockets. My plan will leave the typical family with many thousands of dollars more than they have right now.
So, Bob, this seems to be kind of the centerpiece of the Trump campaign's argument to voters who are still feeling the effects of inflation. Even if it is coming down, prices are still high.
And they're competing right now for those voters who are a little bit on the fence about who to blame. If you blame the Biden administration and Biden-Harris administration for this economic pain you might feel, you've probably already decided to either sit out the election or vote for the Republicans. If you blame big business for raising prices and you attribute all of your economic pain to them, you're probably going to give the Democrats and Vice President Harris a chance here. What you see Harris and Trump doing is they're looking at tax rates. They're looking at the Trump tax cuts from 2017, and they're trying to come up with that sweet spot politically. For Harris, for example, it's about increasing taxes on corporations and wealthy Americans to a point, but not doing it in a way that she seems too progressive or too populist in the eyes of some of those people she wants on her side, traditional Republicans, the Liz Cheneys of the Philadelphia suburbs, the Atlanta suburbs, the Detroit suburbs, those people who might have concerns about Trump's character, but they don't want to just vote on character alone. They want some kind of economic rationale for voting for a Democrat if they're a traditional centrist or Republican. So Harris wants a sweet spot that makes it palatable for them to stay with her. And Trump's trying to make sure he gets the worker and the business person.
Yeah, these policy proposals are often messaging about which voters they're targeting, and that's a fascinating dynamic you outlined there. Bob Costa, thank you as always for your reporting. We appreciate it. And let's go now to our Weijia Jiang, who is joining us from the North Lawn to discuss Harris's debate preparations. Weijia, it's great to see you. I think it's so interesting and telling that the vice president is basically camping out in Pennsylvania for the next several days to prepare for this debate. Of course, Pennsylvania, arguably the most important battleground state this season. Can you tell us a little bit about what she is doing there, how she's preparing?
And Caitlin, that is precisely why she has chosen to prepare for this debate in Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh, actually. And that is because as she zooms in on how she is planning to take on Donald Trump and really prepares, she will be taken off of the campaign trail in terms of those big rallies, those back-to-back events, meeting face-to-face with so many potential voters. And that is why she wants to burrow herself into such a critical battleground state, because she's got to eat, she's got to go out at some point, and it's in those moments that the campaign believes she can connect with voters. She can still have FaceTime with these really important people who she won't be able to really focus on because she is spending so much time with her team preparing for this critical debate. And the campaign says that, you know, this is something that previous candidates have done as well, pointing to then-candidate Obama back in 2012, who prepped for a debate in Nevada. And so they say it's not rare. And for her, as you mentioned, for this particular election, you know, it's all about Pennsylvania. It's very difficult to win without winning that state.
Yeah, it never hurts to have a local headline while you're getting out to eat at a local restaurant. So we'll see where she decides to stop over the next few days. Weija, it's really interesting because we learned today, too, that she is set to meet with the Teamsters, and the president of the Teamsters was on Face the Nation on Sunday saying that he wanted to talk to her, that you can't essentially, agree to support anybody until you've met with them. What should we be looking for in that meeting?
So this is a roundtable with rank and file members. It's something that former President Trump has done with the Teamsters, and President Biden did when he was going to be the nominee. And so the president of the Teamsters says that, this is a chance for her to openly talk to the members. He says half of the group, 1.3 million members, by the way, are Republicans and half are Democrats. And so before you offer anyone the job, he wants to represent all of the members and make sure there is an interview process, which is how they are treating this with the vice president. And so the Teamsters is the last of the 10 largest unions in the country not to formally endorse someone. And what's really interesting, Caitlin, is that the president, Sean O'Brien, did appear at the Republican National Convention over the summer. And so that opened up a lot of questions about where this endorsement might land. But he has also since criticized Trump for Trump's remarks about whether workers should be able to retain their jobs if they strike. And so I think this is going to be a very robust conversation. She's meeting with the leadership as well as with workers. And then, of course, they'll relay that to all of their members as she tries to win over this endorsement.
Yeah, with this key demographic that both campaigns are fighting for this election cycle. Weija Jiang, as always, we thank you.
Sure.
And a quick programming note, I will be anchoring special editions of America Decides on Debate Night this Tuesday live from the Spin Room in Philadelphia at 5 p.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern. The debate itself is hosted by ABC News, but can also be watched right here on CBS News starting at 9 p.m. Eastern. And it's a $15 billion deal to sell U.S. steel to Japan that President Biden, Kamala Harris, and Donald Trump all oppose. So why does a Pennsylvania mayor say it should still go through? Well, we'll ask him next. You're streaming America Decides. Meanwhile, in a presidential campaign where both candidates have two completely different visions for the country, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump agree on this. U.S. steel should not be sold to Japan's Nippon Steel. And President Joe Biden is set to block the almost $15 billion acquisition. Hundreds of U.S. steel workers have rallied in Pittsburgh in support of the deal. U.S. Steel's CEO has warned if it collapses, the company may leave the city and take thousands of jobs with it. Residents remain optimistic of what a deal could bring to Pittsburgh.
And as far as I'm concerned about the Nippon Steel deal, it's going to bring money into the Pittsburgh area. It's gonna make the steel mills better. It's gonna take some of the pollution out. So, why not let it come in?
So for more on this, let's bring in Mayor Chris Kelly of West Mifflin, Pennsylvania. He has warned that there could be severe consequences for steel in his state if Biden blocks the deal. Mayor, good to see you. Thanks for being here. So if this deal gets blocked, what could be the ramifications for your area?
We're talking about 3 steel mill plants and thousands of jobs that U.S. Steel said that are antiquated and they would close. Nippon has offered to modernize it, put billions of dollars into the plants, guarantee jobs, guarantee pensions, guarantee future of people that have worked historically. Their families have had 4 or 5 generations in U.S. Steel. This is a win-win for everybody. I know of no negative things. And what makes me little upset is all the national politicians have not talked to the people in the Mon Valley that it will affect. They don't realize the effect that it will have on their jobs. These communities, Clairton, Braddock, West Mifflin, rely on these good-paying jobs for their families, for their education, and for every steel worker that works in these 3 plants. 7 outside cursory jobs are created. The vice president is just a few miles from my house this week. She can come to my garage, which is my office, and we can sit down and talk as what is best for these individuals. They've not talked to the local unions. They're relying on the international union, who has not had one word of dialect with the local unions. You don't run a business that way. You don't say, I'm closing you up, I'm stopping this deal without talking to the people that are affected. Sorry.
Yeah, and Mayor, I think people may be wondering why the administration is trying to block this deal. Their argument is that this deal poses a national security risk, and I'm wondering what your response is to that.
God almighty. If we were to make something for the military in these plants, the military has inspectors at the sites. National security. Are we forgetting that Japan is our ally and that we have 21,000 naval people posted in Japan right now in the 7th Fleet and 3 times that amount as support personnel? It's not a national security. These jobs will still be held by U.S. citizens doing U.S. jobs, doing it under the name of U.S. Steel. And there'll be modernization that will create additional jobs. This is a win-win for everybody. Absolutely.
And we've talked about the candidates at the top of the ticket this election cycle, but I also understand that you called Senator John Fetterman, who of course is your senator in Pennsylvania, to try to change his mind. I'm wondering what you've heard from him. Have you had any success dealing with him or any other leaders in Washington on this?
Listen, John Fetterman lives in the shadow of one of the plants that may close in Braddock. I was unsuccessful getting into his office to get a response. I've not heard back from Mr. Fetterman. I wish I would. He has a beef with the upper management of U.S. Steel. That's fine. Don't take it out on the workers. There'll be new management. If this place sells, there'll be new management. It'll be Nippon U.S. Steel. It won't be the people that he has a grudge against. And I wish I would hear from him. I'd like to sit down with John. I've met him a few times. He was the mayor. We border Braddock. We were next door neighbors.
Yeah. Pennsylvania, of course, is the most watched state this election season, the biggest battleground state. Donald Trump was able to win over many steelworkers in 2016 when he won there in Pennsylvania. What do you make of him siding with Harris and Biden on this?
Well, as far as I know, it's the only thing that they can agree on. And that's scary. I don't see Donald Trump as a businessman. How he cannot look that this is good business. We're going to invest billions of dollars into an antiquated plant to make things better, to create more jobs. How do you go against that? And I would just wish that President Biden, Vice President Harris, Donald Trump as the Republican nominee, come see me, come into our town. I will drive you around personally, and we'll talk to some workers.
All right, Mayor Chris Kelly, thank you so much for your time. Hunter Biden has pleaded guilty to all 9 charges in his federal tax case. The judge has accepted his plea, and sentencing is scheduled for December 16th. And we will be right back. You're streaming America Decides.
He plans to give billionaires massive tax cuts and to cut corporate taxes by over $1 trillion, even as they pull in record profits.
Comrade Kamala Harris wants to sacrifice our wealth, kill the economy, and drive jobs overseas to punish businesses.
So as you heard there, Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump are hitting each other very hard on the economy. And our polling shows that that is the top issue for voters in the 2024 presidential election. With us now, Democratic strategist James Carville joining us. Thank you very much for being here. So I think mostly everyone in America has heard this phrase. It's the economy, stupid. And you were the one that coined that phrase. Doesn't it apply this time around?
Well, first of all, since the Cold War, 1989, under the Democratic administration, there have been 50 million jobs created. Under Republicans, 1 million. So what are we talking about here? And, I think perceptions on the economy are not static. They evolve. And her number has gone up since she's gotten in the race. And by the way, taxing incomes over $500 million a year is probably the most popular thing you can do in the United States. And the corporate tax rate at 28% is not that high. It raises, $1 trillion worth of revenue. And some of this money has got to be to help young people buy houses and get educated. And the stock market and corporate profits at an all-time high, and rich people's incomes at an all-time high. So I think it's very sound public policy.
It's interesting because yesterday, Kamala Harris broke a little bit with Biden in terms of capital gains taxes. Do you think that she should separate herself further from the president?
Well, I wrote a piece in the New York Times 3 or 4 days ago, and I said she'd have to come up with some distinct programs because President Biden was more progressive than President Obama was. And I think you're going to be seeing a little bit more of this as we get closer to Election Day.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about that op-ed that you wrote for the New York Times, because you also had some advice for the Harris campaign. In it, you say that Harris has to lay the tracks for a Trump train wreck during the debate that's happening next Tuesday. What exactly are you talking about here? How can she do that?
Well, first of all, I think she's having an excellent prep. And I actually think she's going to win the debate because Trump is not going to prepare. She's got some top flight people. I think she's got a lot better on the feet. And if Trump shows up, which I think is still in some doubt, I think she'll do just fine, really just fine. And I think one of the flashpoints should be raising taxes on high income people and raising the corporate tax and helping young people who are struggling more in this economy than people over 50 are.
Yeah, I mean, you have contributed to a lot of different campaigns, had a lot of advice for Democrats. I mean, we're just coming off a DNC that was successful for the party, raised a lot of money for the party, obviously, and yet this race is neck and neck. Should Democrats be worried?
I'm always worried in an election. I mean, it's the nature of being in electoral politics as long as I have, is to be worried. And I don't take anything for granted. Right after it first started, I said, let's not spike the ball. We got a long way to go. And they attacked me for being Debbie Downer and everything else. It's a close election, and let's act like it. And I'm not thinking about where we are. I'm thinking about pushing this whole thing through, playing through Election Day. And I'll let them, there's a whole prediction industry out there, and let them predict. And I'm just going to try to every morning get up and see how I can help save the Constitution of the United States. That's just my attitude.
Yeah, I want to talk about a little bit of what Kamala Harris said in an interview last week. She said her values have not changed, and that was in response to questions about some of her changing policy stances since 2020. I'm curious what you think of that response, because no doubt she will be asked kind of more definitively at the debate.
Undoubtedly, and I hope she says if Donald Trump can tell me his position on abortion right this minute, I'd be glad to know it because it changes every 24 hours. So, yes, she can say, I evolved, I learned, I was on a job. I think that some of the things I proposed in 2020 were not that wise, and I changed my mind. But what's the big deal there? Trump doesn't, I don't know how he's going to vote on this referendum in Florida, neither does he, by the way. So it's, as John Maynard Keynes says, when the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do? I think she can turn that into an element of strength, and I think she's going to be very well prepared to answer that question. But I said in a piece, she's going to have to answer it. There's no doubt about it. I mean, that punch is telegraphed, and it's coming, and be ready for it.
All right, well, we will find out sure enough in just a few days here. And I agree with you. There's no use in predicting. We just follow the campaign as it goes on. James Carville, thank you so much for your time, as always. Good to see you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. You bet.
And coming up, why a former congresswoman from one of the most famous Republican families says she's voting for the Democrat this time. You're streaming America Decides. And welcome back to America Decides. Yet another former prominent conservative is joining the effort to elect Kamala Harris. The former chair of the Republican House Conference, Liz Cheney, lost her 2022 primary after expressing some outrage over Trump's action on January 6th. She has remained a vocal Trump critic ever since, and yesterday at Duke University, she told students she would be voting for the vice president. And let's bring in our panel, Shelby Talcott and Jasmine Wright. Shelby is politics reporter for Semaphore, and Jasmine is politics reporter for Notice. Ladies, great to see you here in Washington. I know you're always out on the campaign trail. So let's talk about Liz Cheney. Shelby, I mean, you've been covering Republicans for a while now. Does this make any difference? I mean, she's kind of the Republican that Republicans don't think is a Republican.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was about to say. I think, never say never. I do think that there's a sliver of Republicans like Liz Cheney who don't really like Donald Trump, maybe aren't sure of Kamala Harris's policies. Those are perhaps the people that she could influence. But in terms of influencing staunch Republicans, when I talk to Republicans, when I talk to Donald Trump's campaign about this, they basically say, well, she's not really a Republican anymore. And so that's, I think, how she's viewed by a wide swath of Republicans. So there are some people that she could influence. Sure. Is it going to be a huge amount? I'm not convinced.
I think it's less about Republicans, though, and more about independence for the Harris campaign, right? I mean, I don't think that they believe that a Liz Cheney endorsement is going to tap away from Donald Trump's base. Particularly, we know how hardcore they are. But they do believe in some ways that maybe this could help bring over the independents to the Harris campaign, particularly that 15% that potentially don't know how they're going to vote or don't know what Harris is going to do in office.
Yeah, I'm thinking about those kind of Nikki Haley voters, especially in the suburbs that we saw post, after she dropped out. A lot of them may not have been Republicans anyway, but looking for another option. Just amazing, though, this storied Republican family of saying she's voting for the Democrat. Let's talk about the debate, because it is endlessly fascinating to me that Donald Trump and Kamala Harris have never met before. They will meet in just a few days. Jasmine, I know you have some reporting about how Kamala Harris is preparing for this. This is her first presidential debate.
Yeah. Well, that preparation is moving from Howard University, where she's actually been prepping for months. She started prepping when she was still the vice presidential nominee for whoever Trump's nominee would be. And now it's moving to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where they're going to hold a debate camp where they can really do around-the-clock mock debates at full 90 minutes, trying to create muscle memory for her to get into the mode of being a debater, because they recognize that she's a rusty debater. It's been almost 4 years to the month that she debated Vice President Pence in Utah. And so they're getting her back into that mode, but it's also more intensive, trying to break her of things like fixating on details, over preparation that we know that she's been known to do, kind of a part of her prosecutorial past, and trying to get her into that tit-for-tat moment. I think there's a couple goals for her. Yes, it is policy, trying to articulate her future forward policies. It's trying to disprove Trump's lies when they get personal, but also it's about temperament, trying to show the contrast between her personality and Donald Trump's, and really trying not to get bogged down when they believe that he may say lies about her that venture into the personal type of cross-the-line moments.
Yeah, and it's interesting, that preparation versus Donald Trump, who the campaign likes to tell us he doesn't need to prepare. And we saw that he had a lot of success in the last presidential debate. I mean, his opponent had to leave the race, essentially. Shelby, what do you know about kind of how the Trump campaign is thinking about this debate?
Yeah, I think they're viewing this debate in the lens as they have viewed every other debate with Donald Trump, and it is a very unique, is the way I would describe it, way to prepare, which is essentially almost a lack of preparation. And they've argued for months now that Donald Trump prepares best by going out and speaking to voters and doing his rallies and doing interviews, and he's answering questions, and that is basically a form of debate prep, as opposed to what Harris is doing, which is more traditional sit down, sort of going to Pennsylvania early and meeting with her team. Donald Trump is really doing, I wouldn't say none of that. He has sat down. They call them more policy events versus, traditional debate prep. So he is talking with his advisors about policy, but it is certainly not the traditional sit down, let's do a mock debate. He does not do that.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see, that worked for Biden. We'll see kind of how it plays against Harris. But we do know that the rules are set for this debate. Yeah. So the drama over the muted mics has finally come to an end. The debate over debates. I kind of want to hear from both of you, but how do you think that this muted mic might have an impact on the debate?
Well, I certainly know that the Harris campaign isn't necessarily happy about it, particularly because they wanted an instance in which they could recreate the I'm speaking moment that she had with Pence in 2020. That wasn't just off the cuff. That was, somebody told me, a crowdsourced line when they really thought about, okay, would he interrupt her? And if he does, how should they respond. And so they wanted to kind of recreate that moment when they know that Donald Trump is probably going to try to interrupt her, when they know that Donald Trump will probably try to in some ways intimidate her, a la 2016 Hillary Clinton. And so they wanted to create language around it, making her, again, not just comparatively seem better on policy, but also seem better on temperament. And so I think that they're going to have to try to figure out a different way to do that, like potentially having, we were talking about it earlier, having the press listen in closer or things like that, trying to create moments in which he seems out of control, even if they can't do that via the mics.
Yeah, I mean, the muted mic seemed to benefit Trump in the last debate.
Yes, and that is what I said, and I was actually surprised when President Biden's team suggested the muted mics, because if you look at 2020, that was one of Donald Trump's big detriments, was the debates. Voters were turned off by how he acted during some of those debates. And when I talked to Donald Trump's advisors, they recognize that the muted mics have benefited him. And so they have been obviously very aggressive in saying, well, you know, we had these rules for the CNN debate. You wanted the same rules as the CNN debate, so now we have them. So when I talk to Donald Trump's advisors, they say, yeah, of course, we're totally happy with the muted mics. Donald Trump himself, however, might not be, right? He has no problem saying publicly, you know, I would do non-muted mics. But I think ultimately it has the potential to benefit the former president, for sure.
And the point is going to be for the Harris campaign, can they goad him still to do things, even though while he's on stage, even though the mics are muted, goad him to kind of step out of his comfort zone or that comfortable place and do something that could look unseemly.
Right, yeah. It'll be interesting, too, if they do allow some, you know, pool reporters in the room, too, to kind of pick up on some of that. Shelby, I know you have some new reporting, too, about the state of Florida. Used to be a swing state.
Yeah, there's been a lot of debate about whether or not Florida could go for Democrats. And I think a lot of the Democrats who believe that they have a chance this cycle are Florida Democrats. When I talk to people outside of Florida, they sort of acknowledge they're not convinced. And I think ultimately there's always cycles during every campaign where people are like, okay, well, what about Florida? What about Virginia for Republicans, for example? But until the campaign starts spending serious money in those states, it is essentially just wish casting.
Yeah, follow the money on those sorts of things, although the ballot measure might be interesting on abortion.
Exactly.
So we'll see how that plays out. Ladies, great to have you both and your reporting. Always good to have you. Thank you so much, Shelby and Jasmine. We'll see you very soon. Coming up, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson in her first broadcast interview since joining the Supreme Court. She spoke to our Norah O'Donnell, and what she had to say is next. You're streaming America Decides. And welcome back to America Decides. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson recently sat down with CBS News for her first broadcast interview since joining the Supreme Court in 2022. Our own Norah O'Donnell discussed several topics with her, including affirmative action, which the nation's highest court struck down back in June of last year.
I want to ask you about in the University of North Carolina affirmative action case. Justice Thomas responded to your dissent by describing your views on race as follows. As she sees things, we are inexorably trapped in a fundamentally racist society, with the original sin of slavery and the historical subjugation of Black Americans still determining our lives today. What did you make of that?
Well, you know, let me just say that the justices use our opinions as an opportunity to explain to the public our views. That's Justice Thomas's view of my position as expressed in my opinion. And I don't know if Justice Thomas really had anything to respond to with respect to the actual fact. And that's all that I was really focusing on.
But he wrote, she sees things, we are all inexorably trapped in a fundamentally racist society. Do you believe that?
No. No, and my opinion didn't say that.
Yeah.
My opinion said, look at where we've been and understand what affirmative action was designed to do. We still exist in a society in which the gaps that were initially created as a result of slavery, as a result of Jim Crow, exist. And that affirmative action, for example, was really a response.
Do you think that you and Justice Thomas fundamentally view race differently?
I haven't talked to him about this in particular. I can tell you what I feel and what I know, and that is that all of us are created equal, that we have in our society, you know, the front of the Supreme Court says equal justice under law. And there was a time historically in which this country wasn't living into that principle, that promise. That's just a fact. I think it's important to remember those facts as we evaluate how much further we need to go, what progress we've made. I believe we can do it.
And that does it for us today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News 24/7.